Daniel and Marlene lived what seemed like an ordinary life, quiet, stable, and built on decades of trust. But on their 36th wedding anniversary, a single letter shattered everything, pulling back the curtain on a hidden past so dark that it would destroy their family, unravel a decades-old mystery, and end in a moment of unimaginable rage. Daniel and Marlene Whitmore had lived in Autumn Ridge for over 3 decades, and in all that time, they had never caused a stir. Their white house with navy shutters sat on the corner of Maple Street, a quiet cul-de-sac in a sleepy Midwest town where people still waved to each other from their driveways. Every holiday, their porch was carefully decorated. Flags for the 4th of July, pumpkins in October, white lights at Christmas. They were the kind of couple that others admired. Steady, friendly, dependable. Daniel, a retired accountant, was methodical and calm, while Marlene, who ran a small flower arrangement business from their garage, was warm and talkative. Together, they seemed perfectly matched. They had 2 grown children, both of whom had moved to different states but called home often. Their lives revolved around Sunday church, coffee with neighbors, and quiet evenings spent in front of the television. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. Daniel handled the bills with precision. Marlene kept their social calendar full with potlucks and church bake sales. After 36 years of marriage, their routine was clockwork. If there were ever problems between them, no one in Autumn Ridge ever saw them. The couple's long marriage was often cited as an example of lasting love in a world that seemed to move too fast. Friends spoke fondly of the way Marlene always placed her hand on Daniel's arm when she laughed, or how Daniel would bring her fresh coffee each morning, no matter the season. To those who watched from the outside, theirs was a love story that had stood the test of time. So when July 3rd arrived, their wedding anniversary, it was no surprise that Daniel had planned a quiet dinner and Marlene had ordered a special cake from the bakery downtown. The table was already set by mid-afternoon, the air conditioner humming in the background, the kitchen smelling faintly of lemon and garlic. The mail had arrived late as usual, and Daniel went out to collect it with little thought. A few bills, a gardening catalog for Marlene, and one letter without a return name. The envelope looked older than the others, the paper thick and slightly yellowed, and the handwriting neat but unfamiliar. He nearly tossed it aside, but something about it, maybe the weight or the care taken to address it, made him pause. The name on it wasn't his or Marlene's. It was addressed to a Carla Jensen. He stared at the name for a long time before carrying it in. At first he thought maybe it had been delivered to the wrong house, but the address was theirs, clear as day. The strange letter was the first thing to ever feel out of place in their home. Daniel placed it on the kitchen counter and poured himself a cup of coffee. He didn't open it right away, but as the day passed and Marlene hummed in the kitchen, carefully arranging the centerpiece for their dinner, he found himself glancing at it again and again. Something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong yet. The envelope stayed on the kitchen counter for hours, untouched but impossible to ignore. Every time Daniel passed by it, his eyes were drawn to the name written in clean, looping cursive, Carla Jensen. It was a name he had never heard before. Not from Marlene, not from anyone in their lives. The handwriting didn't look like junk mail or a scam. There was no company logo, no barcode, no advertising language. Just a simple heavy envelope with a Nevada postmark dated 2 days earlier. Eventually Daniel picked it up and took it into his study. He turned it over in his hands a few times before opening it with a letter opener from his desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, cream-colored like the envelope. The message was typed centered on the page and brief. They found the vault. What do we do now? There was no signature, no contact number, just that one chilling sentence. Daniel reread it several times, his pulse gradually quickening. He didn't understand what it meant, not yet. But he knew instinctively that this wasn't some simple mistake. This was a message meant for someone who had once gone by a name she no longer used. He walked into the kitchen and set the letter down next to Marlene, who was frosting the small cake they'd picked up from the bakery. She smiled at him and asked him to hand her the blue icing. For a moment he said nothing. Then he asked casually, too casually, "Do you know anyone named Carla Jensen?" Marlene paused, her hand hovering above the cake, then gave a small laugh. She said she didn't, said it must have been a misdelivery. There was nothing in her voice to suggest she was lying, but Daniel had lived with her for 36 years. He knew her patterns, her tones, her habits. Something in her body language was off. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. Her eyes didn't meet him. He pressed a little further, asking about the letter. She looked at it, shrugged, and told him it was probably junk, that it wasn't worth worrying about. She offered to toss it with the rest of the mail, but Daniel took it back and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't mention it again that night, but the unease had already taken root. Their anniversary dinner passed quietly. They ate grilled salmon and roasted potatoes. Marlene brought out the cake and poured 2 glasses of wine. They exchanged gifts, nothing extravagant, just small tokens of love. But for the first time in decades, Daniel couldn't enjoy the celebration. He smiled at the right moments, laughed at her stories, but his mind kept circling back to that name and that letter. By bedtime he had memorized the message. They found the vault. What do we do now? It played in his mind like a loop. He didn't know what vault they were referring to. He didn't know who they were, but he knew with absolute certainty that Marlene had lied to him, and he knew he would find out why. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed beside Marlene, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the ceiling fan spinning slowly above them. He kept glancing over at her, wondering how many secrets were locked inside the woman he'd spent more than half his life with. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. She looked like the same Marlene he had loved for 36 years, but the letter had changed something. It cracked the surface of their quiet life, and now he couldn't stop wondering what else might be buried beneath it. The next morning, while Marlene went to her garden club meeting, Daniel began searching. He didn't even know what he was looking for, just something, anything, that would confirm his growing suspicion. He started with the filing cabinets in the office, digging through folders of old bills, tax returns, and insurance documents. Everything appeared in order, neatly labeled and dated, but none of it went further back than night. He realized something then. Marlene had never talked much about her life before they met. She'd mentioned growing up in the West, Nevada, maybe, but there were no photo albums from her childhood, no yearbooks, no letters from family. She had told him her parents had passed away long ago, and that she was an only child. At the time he hadn't thought much of it. People left things behind, but now it all felt suspiciously clean, like it had been wiped away. By the afternoon he was climbing up into the attic, a place neither of them visited often. Boxes of Christmas decorations, old baby clothes and dusty photo frames were stacked along the wooden beams. He rummaged through them carefully, examining each container with new intensity. Then in the far corner behind a pile of plastic wreaths, he found a shoebox with no label. It was taped shut. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were a few old documents, brittle with age, a newspaper clipping, yellowed from time, 3 sought in Vegas casino heist, $2.4 million missing. But what froze Daniel completely was the birth certificate. It was real, official, and issued in Nevada. The name read, Carla Marlene Jensen. The birth date matched Marlene's exactly. Daniel sat back on the attic floor, stunned. His wife, Marlene Whitmore, had once been Carla Jensen. He reread the certificate over and over, trying to reconcile it with everything he thought he knew. Had she changed her name legally? Was it part of some witness protection program, or had she just decided to disappear? He felt a chill despite the heat trapped in the attic. There was no reason to hide a birth certificate, unless you were hiding from something bigger. By the time Marlene returned home that evening, smiling and sunburned from her day out, Daniel had already placed the box back exactly where he found it. He said nothing. He cooked dinner, made small talk, and pretended everything was fine. But inside, something had shifted permanently. The woman he thought he knew didn't exist, and he was going to find out who she really was. The attic discovery lingered in Daniel's thoughts like a shadow that refused to lift. Each time Marlene spoke, each time she smiled or kissed his cheek, he couldn't help but wonder, was any of it real? Over the next few days he moved through the house like a ghost, pretending to go about his routines while his mind spiraled deeper into the truth he was slowly uncovering. He spent hours in his study, carefully researching every detail from the newspaper clipping he found in the shoebox. The 1982 Las Vegas casino heist had once dominated national headlines. 3 suspects had been involved, all in their 20s, and all vanished without a trace after the robbery. Police recovered the getaway car in a remote part of Nevada, but the $2.4 million in cash had never been found. Two of the suspects were named, but the third had only been identified as Carla Jensen, a local cocktail waitress with no criminal record prior to the heist. The report mentioned that Carla's burned vehicle had been found weeks later on a desolate stretch of road, the charred body inside too badly damaged to confirm identity. With no concrete evidence, investigators had assumed she died in the crash. The case eventually went cold. Daniel stared at the image printed in the old newspaper article, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably, Marlene. Her hair was darker, her face thinner, but the resemblance was undeniable. He compared the picture to their wedding photo hanging above the fireplace. There was no doubt left. His wife had faked her death. She hadn't just changed her name or moved to a new town. She had erased herself completely and stepped into a new life. Their life, the implications were staggering. Marlene, Carla had married him, had children, built friendships and memories, all while hiding from something in her past. And now, decades later, a single letter had threatened to undo all of it. Daniel thought back to the moments they shared over the year. Vacations, Christmas mornings, quiet nights on the porch swing. Were those memories tainted? Had she ever planned to tell him the truth? Or was their entire marriage just a cover for her to stay hidden? He couldn't bring himself to ask her yet, not without more answers. Digging further, Daniel searched public records and death notices from Nevada. He found the coroner's report from 1983. It confirmed an unidentifiable female body was found in the burned-out car registered to Carla Jensen. Dental records were inconclusive. No DNA match was ever made. The case had been ruled presumed deceased due to circumstantial evidence, but that was it. Carla Jensen was never seen again. Until now, Daniel closed the files, heart pounding. He realized the accident hadn't just been an escape. It had been a disappearance staged with precision, and for 36 years, she had succeeded, until the vault was found, until someone reached out reminding her that the past she buried wasn't dead, it was waiting. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the letter's final words. What do we do now? It meant someone else knew, someone from Marlene's old life, and worse, it suggested there was a plan in motion, a next step. He had stumbled into a story decades in the making, and now he needed to know just how deep it went. He started searching for information about the vault mentioned in the letter. It wasn't easy. There were no recent news articles using the exact phrase, and the heist itself was too old to attract modern attention. But then, buried in a local Nevada construction newsletter archived online, he found a brief notice: Desert Ridge project delayed following discovery of sealed underground structure. The site was just outside Goldfield, a long-abandoned mining town, and the article included a single line that caught Daniel's eye. Authorities suspect the structure may be connected to criminal activity in the early 90s. He searched for more details, cross-referencing the location with any mention of the casino robbery. Slowly, a theory began to form. The three suspects had vanished with millions in unmarked bills. Two were never found. Carla had staged her death. That meant they hadn't fled with the money, they had hidden it, somewhere in the Nevada desert, somewhere they always planned to return to, and now after all these years, the hiding place had been found. Daniel pictured the younger version of his wife, driving through the desert with cash stuffed in duffel bags, smoke rising behind her as she abandoned her old life and took up a new one. He imagined her watching the news about the vault discovery, realizing her past had caught up with her. Maybe she was scared, or maybe she was excited, ready to run again, this time with the fortune she had waited so long to reclaim. His thoughts turned to the timing of the letter. It had arrived on their anniversary. Was that a coincidence, or had her contact planned it that way? A reminder that the past was resurfacing, and it was time for action. Daniel's stomach twisted at the thought of it. Had she planned to leave him, walk out of their life with the money she never told him existed? Had all their years together just been a waiting game? He went back to the shoebox in the attic, and looked for more clues. Inside a folded envelope, he found a scrap of paper with a string of numbers and a name, T.R. Parump. The numbers looked like coordinates. The name meant nothing to him, just two initials. But Parump was a town in Nevada, not far from Goldfield. Daniel began to see the shape of it. The robbery, the fake death, the buried vault, and now someone else from the past reaching out. Marlene wasn't just running from something, she might still be a part of it. And Daniel, once just a loving husband, was now at the center of a secret bigger than he ever imagined. Daniel couldn't ignore it anymore. The deeper investigators delved into Kayla's files, the more tangled the threads became. One lead in particular began to stand out, the construction company that appeared repeatedly throughout her research, Northwest Developments. On the surface it was an ordinary business, a mid-size contracting firm that had operated in Millfield and neighboring towns for nearly a decade. They built homes, renovated old buildings, and sponsored Little League teams. Their trucks were a common sight around the region, often parked outside job sites with their green and white logo plastered on the sides. But beneath that polished exterior, something wasn't right. Several names on Kayla's spreadsheet had been former employees or contractors for Northwest Developments. Some had only worked there for a few weeks before abruptly leaving, or in some cases dying under mysterious or tragic circumstances. It was a pattern no one had noticed before. The company's records were vague, pay stubs were missing, tax filings were inconsistent, and several listed addresses for employees that didn't exist. To investigators, it looked like a ghost operation, using fake workers and real identities to funnel money through the business and into offshore accounts. Ryan had worked for Northwest Developments briefly the year before he died. According to Kayla's notes, he took a job there after leaving the garage, but never told her much about it. He only stayed for about 6 weeks before quitting without explanation. After that he had returned to his old job, but something about him had changed. He was quieter, more distracted. Kayla had written in her journal that he seemed tired all the time, and paranoid about small things. She chalked it up to stress, but now investigators saw it differently. It was likely that Ryan had discovered something while working for the company, something he wasn't supposed to see, perhaps a falsified invoice, a payroll sheet with names he didn't recognize, or maybe even a financial transaction that didn't add up. Whatever it was, it had clearly spooked him enough to walk away, but walking away may not have been enough. Bank records showed that after he left the company, money continued flowing through his account, deposits in his name, transfers he never authorized. It seemed someone had kept using his identity long after he was gone. This made the overdose ruling even more suspicious. If Ryan had threatened to report what he knew, or had simply become a liability, then his death may have been far from accidental. The construction company itself was a maze of legal protections. It was owned by a holding group with ties to other companies throughout the Pacific Northwest. All were registered under different names, using legal loopholes to avoid scrutiny. No one person appeared on the records more than once. No direct connection to criminal activity could yet be proven, but every time investigators tried to pull back a layer, they ran into another wall. It was clear someone had built the perfect cover, and Kayla had been chipping away at that cover piece by piece. She had identified connections no one else had seen. She had tracked financial irregularities, uncovered false employee records, and even highlighted real estate deals that looked like money laundering fronts. She was getting close, dangerously close. The pieces were starting to fit together. Northwest Developments was more than just a company. It was the center of something larger, something designed to hide money, erase identities, and silence anyone who asked the wrong questions. Ryan had seen too much. Kayla had gone even further, and now both were gone. Detectives turned their attention fully to Northwest Developments, now convinced it was the center of the web Kayla had been unraveling. From the outside, it still looked like a legitimate operation, active job sites, a functioning website, clean financial statement. But as investigators dug deeper, they began to see the gaps Kayla had already flagged, most notably a troubling pattern of properties purchased and sold under shell companies, sometimes flipped within weeks for suspiciously inflated prices. It was classic laundering behavior, hiding dirty money beneath layers of paperwork and seemingly normal business transactions. The name Carl Whitmore appeared repeatedly in connection to the company. On paper he was listed only as a senior project manager, but witnesses, former employees, and internal emails told a different story. Carl was in charge. He made hiring decisions, approved budgets, and handled most of the major property deals. Yet despite his position, he kept an unusually low public profile. There were almost no photos of him online. He didn't attend company events, and while he lived in Millfield, no one seemed to know much about him beyond his work. Carl had no prior criminal record, but he had a history of moving from town to town every few years, always attached to a different company that shut down or changed ownership shortly after he left. Several of these firms were later discovered to have questionable accounting practices or unpaid taxes. It was a trail of unfinished business and untraceable money, but nothing had ever stuck to him. Now, with Kayla's notes pointing in his direction, police began building a timeline of his movements. One entry in Kayla's journal stood out. She had written that CW was at the coffee shop again, didn't recognize. At the time she may not have been sure who he was, but the initials matched. It meant Carl had likely known Kayla was watching the company, and if he'd seen her more than once, it wasn't a coincidence. She had spooked someone. Investigators began cross-referencing Carl's phone records and vehicle GPS data. A chilling detail emerged. On the morning of Ryan's funeral, Carl's car had been within a mile of the church during the window of Kayla's murder. He never attended the funeral, nor was there any reason for him to be nearby. When questioned, he claimed to have been running errands, but no receipts or surveillance footage supported his story. His alibi was thin. Still, there wasn't enough to arrest. He hadn't pulled the trigger, at least, not that anyone could prove, but the pressure was mounting, and someone was getting nervous. A week after Carl was first questioned, he vanished. His home was found empty, the furniture gone, electronics wiped clean, his bank accounts were drained, and his passport was flagged as missing. He had disappeared without a trace. Whatever Carl knew, he wasn't planning to share it. His sudden escape only confirmed what detectives suspected. Kayla had been right. The construction company was a cover, and the deeper she went, the closer she got to people willing to kill to protect what they'd built. With Carl Whitmore gone, the investigation hit a frustrating dead end. Detectives scrambled to piece together what they could from the trail he left behind, but his disappearance was calculated. He'd erased almost every trace of his life in Millfield, leaving behind only questions and uneasy suspicions. Yet the pressure to solve the case only intensified. Kayla and Ryan Morgan's deaths were no longer isolated tragedies, but the visible cracks in a much larger scheme. The police turned their focus to the employees and associates of Northwest Developments, hoping to find someone willing to talk, but what they found was a tight-knit group, loyal to each other and wary of outsiders. Many had been with the company for years, others were temp workers, who seemed to appear and vanish without explanation. Rumors swirled about money changing hands in cash, off-the-books deals, and off-site meetings that no one would discuss. Still, no one broke the code of silence. Then a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a janitor named Marcus, who had worked nights cleaning Northwest's main office. He told detectives he had overheard conversations that didn't add up. Words like shipment, clearing, and front were mentioned repeatedly. He remembered a heated argument one evening between Carl Whitmore and a man he only knew as Jay, someone with authority, but whose identity no one openly acknowledged. Marcus had noticed another odd detail, several deliveries of what he described as heavy boxes arriving late at night, guarded by men in plain clothes. The boxes were never opened in the office, but promptly moved into a locked storage room that no employee could enter. He never saw inside the room, but he found the whole situation suspicious. This small thread led investigators to examine the storage unit more closely. With a warrant, they gained access and discovered something shocking, an assortment of documents, ledgers, and electronic devices containing detailed records of financial transactions. Among the files were lists of names, amounts, dates, and references to offshore accounts and shell companies. The complexity of the operation suggested a money laundering scheme far larger than anyone had imagined. More importantly, the documents included references to several local figures, including some prominent Millfield residents. It was clear the network extended beyond the construction company, reaching into town politics and local businesses. The scale of corruption shook the community and added layers of risk for anyone trying to expose. At the heart of this operation was someone known only as the silent accomplice. According to the records, this person handled communications, arranged payments, and ensured the scheme remained hidden from prying eyes. No one had seen them, and no name appeared in any formal document. Yet the silent accomplice had the power to protect the operation and silence threats. With this revelation, the investigation took on new urgency. Detectives realized Kayla's killer was not just protecting the company, but protecting a deeply buried secret tied to the very fabric of Millfield. The question now was who among those closest to the Morgans, or even within their circle, could be the silent accomplice, and how far would they go to keep their secrets safe? As the investigation deepened, detectives began to sift through Kayla's personal relationships, searching for anyone who might fit the elusive role of the silent accomplice. The idea that someone close to the Morgans could be involved sent a ripple of unease through the community. Who could have betrayed Kayla and Ryan so completely? Who was hiding behind a mask of trust and family ties? Kayla had been careful, but not perfect. In her journals and notes, investigators found references to a family friend, someone she had known since childhood, who had become more involved in recent months. This person, whose name appeared repeatedly with the initials, had been a constant presence at both Ryan and Kayla's lives, attending family gatherings, helping with errands, even offering support after Ryan's death. On the surface, MT seemed loyal and dependable, but Kayla's notes hinted at suspicion. Further digging revealed that M was employed in a local bank that handled some of Northwest Development's accounts. The position gave access to financial information and the ability to manipulate transactions subtly. Investigators discovered irregularities in Ian's account activity, unexplained deposits, frequent cash withdrawals, and connections to some of the offshore accounts linked to the laundering scheme. It wasn't enough to prove guilt, but it was suspicious. Police looked into MT's background and relationship. A series of text messages and emails recovered from Kayla's phone showed a tense dynamic. Her messages grew increasingly cautious, even fearful, whenever MT was mentioned. There were moments when Kayla seemed close to confronting this person but stopped short. She never openly accused, but her notes suggested she was uncovering evidence that pointed to a betrayal far closer than she expected. When confronted with questions, MT denied any wrongdoing and claimed to have been helping Kayla investigate Ryan's death. But inconsistencies in their statements, and a growing pile of evidence, painted a different picture. Investigators theorized that MT had been quietly feeding information back to the perpetrators, keeping an eye on Kayla's movements, and perhaps even influencing her investigation from within. As suspicion mounted, a chilling realization set in. The killer wasn't just protecting a company or a crime, they were protecting a carefully guarded family secret. A secret that threatened to destroy the Morgan family from within. The more Kayla had dug, the closer she had come to exposing not only financial crimes, but a web of deceit and betrayal embedded in the people she trusted most. The final twist was perhaps the hardest to accept. MT was not just a family friend or a distant acquaintance. They had been like family, someone Kayla had leaned on for support, someone Ryan had considered a brother in arms. That trust had been weaponized against them. With this new lead, the investigation took a dangerous turn. The silent accomplice was no longer a shadowy figure far removed from the Morgans. They were someone who had lived alongside them, hidden in plain sight, and with their identity uncovered. The stakes had never been high. The question remained, how far would this person go to keep their secrets buried? And would justice ever reach the heart of Millfield's darkest betrayal? The revelation that MT, the trusted family friend, could be the silent accomplice sent shockwaves through the investigation, and the Morgan family alike. Detectives now understood that the betrayal was more personal than anyone had imagined. It was no longer just about money laundering or corporate deceit. It was about a carefully concealed betrayal woven deep into the fabric of Kayla's life. But proving MT's involvement was another matter entirely. Authorities intensified their surveillance, monitoring activities day and night. They traced calls, analyzed bank transactions, and quietly interviewed acquaintances. MT maintained a calm exterior, blending effortlessly into daily life, going to work, visiting local spots, and attending community events. The person who seemed so normal on the surface hid a dangerous secret, and the evidence was slowly coming into focus. One critical breakthrough came when police discovered encrypted messages on a burner phone linked to it. The messages detailed instructions for moving funds, disguising transactions, and warning contacts about law enforcement activity. It was a digital breadcrumb trail, confirming MT's central role in the laundering scheme. Even more chilling were texts that suggested knowledge of Kayla's investigation, and hints that she needed to be handled. Despite mounting evidence, MT had managed to maintain plausible deniability. The bank where MT worked claimed no irregularities, and colleagues described as professional and trustworthy.
Family members refused to believe their loved one could be involved, deepening the emotional stakes. Meanwhile, investigators uncovered the full extent of the financial operation. Millions of dollars had been funneled through shell companies, disguised as construction expenses, and laundered through multiple bank accounts. The money trail led to offshore accounts and investments in luxury properties far from Millfield, all under names that concealed the true owner.